Hello and welcome to the Soul Shaking Love podcast. I'm your host, Valerie Green from CoachValerieGreen.com. And this podcast is aimed at helping you connect more deeply to your mind, body, and spirit so that you can attract a soul shaking love connection with your true love. And so today I'm so excited to interview Jonathon Aslay, who is a dating and relationship coach who specializes in helping women in midlife decipher the men who are real for the men that are wasting your time. So I'm so excited to have you here, Jonathon. Hi.
Well, I'm honored to be here for a soul. What is it? Soul. I said soul crushing.
Yes. Oh, soul crushing, soul shaking, where you feel
Shaking. I had
like you,
crushing in
yes.
my head. Soul shaking. I
So,
love it. Soul
well, it's kind
shaking.
of the opposite. They're opposites, right? Soul shaking is like, oh my God, I feel so excited. I can't contain it. Whereas soul crushing is like the opposite. That might be how it feels when you don't feel like you're his priority, right? So that's what we're going to talk
Well,
about
that's
today.
kind of a great segue.
That's
I
what I'm
love that.
saying, right? Yeah, what we're going to talk about is if you don't feel like you're his priority, which is pretty common, right? We can talk
Yeah,
all about that and why that is. And I think a lot of it is a misunderstanding, right? But
absolutely. Absolutely.
that's regardless, it's our experience as women. And so the first thing that I want to talk about is how do you see this happening, especially with the women that you're coaching?
Well, I think, gosh, I mean, I can go off on so many tangents, Valerie. So let me first say that we have to look at relationships kind of like if we have to take a step back in time for a moment. And I literally want everyone to think of caveman days or cave people days. And literally there were 30 people in your tribe, if you will, and that's who you mated with. And back then it was
Right.
called mating. It wasn't really, there was no dating, there was no courting. It was basically a woman would go to the stream to wash her feet and a guy would run up behind her and mate with her. That's what cave people did. Okay,
Right.
so
Hopefully there was like a little bit of foreplay, but yeah.
probably not though. I mean, and this is, and by the way, it's important to recognize why I bring this up is because men are often driven by their biological desire to physically mate with someone. This is going back for a long period of time. And then if we go a little bit, further into history or forward into history, when we lived in tribes and such, and I don't mean the cave person tribe, but the tribes or villages, everyone
Yeah,
you
small
mated with,
villages. Right.
yeah, you mated with someone or you were in a relationship with someone who most likely you knew,
Right.
okay, or they knew your family. And as we evolved into a little bit of smaller towns, and now we'll come to the United States, because the United States is only 250, well, I mean, it's, let's see, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But if we go back really 300 or 400 years, pretty much everyone you were in relationship with someone connected to you or your family.
Right.
Okay, now let's take that up until about 60 years ago. And roughly 60 years ago here in the United States, a lot of people either met while they were in school or they met in the workplace. Again, somebody that you were familiar with. Okay.
Exactly.
And they knew your family, and you most likely shared the same values, and you most likely had the same political affiliation, and you had the same religious affiliation. So there was a lot of alignment.
Yeah, or at
Okay.
least you knew where you stood with people. Because I think I heard the statistics that we're programmed to really feel close to only about 150 to 200 people as our community. That's like
Yeah.
the original small towns were about that. And that's
Yeah.
how we evolved for most of our evolution. And that's what we're
Yeah.
used to, is feeling like we have a community with about that many people. And within that, there's different political views, of the town politics or whatever, or different opinions, but we all know where we stand. And so that probably what I'm sensing that you're going to relate that to is that creates a connection that's not inherently there now.
Yeah. And so if we now fast forward to today, and because of, for those who can't see it, I'm holding up my smartphone here, because of these devices, we now have access to people who wouldn't otherwise be in our purview, number one.
Exactly.
And it's literally going back to the 150 people. that you might feel connected and safe with. I want you to imagine today in the dating marketplace, or the, if you will, and I call it a marketplace, is it's like walking into a football stadium with 100,000 people, and you've got to find those 150 that you actually align with.
Yeah.
Well,
And I
and
mean, if
they're not wearing the same shirt as you, or they're not, so it's much more difficult. But where I was really going with this little history lesson is to understand how human beings have evolved from a mating perspective. Okay,
Mhm.
number one. Number two, and I know this is a really near and dear to your heart, is what happens in midlife in particular. As we age, our childhood wounds and traumas, as well as our adult traumas, begin to bubble up to the surface that wouldn't otherwise are there when we're in our 20s and 30s. We really don't see them because we're driven by our biology, if you will. And all of a sudden, when we start tapping into our emotions, and men in
Mhm.
particular, when our testosterone levels drop and our estrogen levels increase, as John Gray would most likely talk about, is we're actually connected to our emotions, and yet we weren't trained to be connected to our emotions. So all of a sudden, we have these childhood wounds and traumas and adult traumas surfacing. We're not really equipped to navigate this because most human beings, men and women alike, have very weak emotional maturity and very weak relationship skills.
Yeah,
So
unfortunately. And it's just because it's something that's not emphasized on being taught.
yeah, nobody teaches us how to be, we're taught how to pay our bills and go to work on time and wake up, although I don't know if the younger generation does. But
Well,
for
I
the same
mean,
degree.
that's what the older generation always says about the younger generation. But
So, but ultimately, emotional maturity is far more necessary in a healthy, happy relationship today. Unlike with the cave people and villages in town, their primary need was survival.
Right.
And women in particular were very dependent upon men physically for survival.
Yeah,
And as we evolve,
absolutely.
and as we evolve to more of a pay and play environment, and what I mean by pay and play is, if you want to have a roof over your head, you have to pay for it. If you
Right.
want to have food on your table, you have to pay for it versus building it or hunting it. So now women who are now pretty close to, I think they actually exceed men in the workforce from a numbers perspective. I know the income differential
Right.
varies in certain circumstances, but at the end of the day, most women actually can financially, since they can financially take care of themselves, they can put a roof over their head and food in their belly. Okay, so they're not dependent upon men. Although here's an interesting observation, and what I'm about to say anecdotally is, if women throughout the last 200,000 years have been dependent upon men from a biological standpoint, wouldn't that suggest that on some level it's in their DNA to be more dependent upon men, even though they can financially take care of themselves? And what happens is, this is my supposition, is women tend to give their power away to men more often than not because of this DNA being trickled down in the last 200,000 years since Neanderthals.
Yeah, I mean, I love the emphasis on us giving our power away, because I do think that that's where to put the focus. That is what we've done as feminine energy people. It's also what you're saying, that trauma coming up in men who are going through andropause is that they've denied their own feminine essence up until then, when estrogen starts allowing it a little more from a biological perspective, right? And so what that means is that we've been cut off from our emotions and from our needs and from our own self-worth. We think we need, if we think we need something else outside of us for our survival, which used to be biological, but because if we don't have emotional maturity skills, we also think we need a man for emotional support, or we think we can't take care of ourselves. And so the opportunity in taking our power back is in doing our inner work, right? Which I'm
Exactly.
sure you're going to talk about.
Well, and what I've observed for women in particular, and I'm not suggesting this isn't true for men, but women in particular, is oftentimes their validation of in life is that I need you to love me so I can feel good about myself. That's
Exactly.
giving
That's the
power away.
programming. And so what I want to say, right, is that like that's not necessarily, I don't think that's necessarily because we've been dependent on men that we do that, although those are both true, that like we've been biologically dependent on men.
I say it as I wonder how much this plays a part in this, beside the biological piece of where a woman
Right.
has sex with a man and oxytocin is released and bonded. How much, and I don't know if they can actually study this. This is again my supposition, is
Yeah.
I wonder if the dependency on some level from a physical perspective plays a part in the giving the power away, because men don't inherently give their power away to women in relationship. They tend to be the more dominant ones. And if women have throughout history been a little bit more submissive, and again, I'm saying this as a conversation, not necessarily as a statement of fact, I
I know
wonder if
that.
that plays a part in the frustration, because now women can say, look, I don't need you to take care of me. I want someone who can show up with a bit of more emotional maturity and relationship skills. And so, but
Right. And
go ahead.
ultimately what we want to know is how do we do that, right? How do we attract someone that has more emotional maturity? I just think it's not, I mean, my opinion at least, because this is cool.
Yeah.
Like we're just like, hey, what is the connection? I don't know. You don't know. My opinion though is that it's not as simple as there being a correlation of here's why. I think it has a lot to do with biology, and I think it also has to do with our programming, our trauma, as you're talking about, that starts coming up when we're disconnected from our feelings and needs. And therefore, yes, my biological programming might say I depend on someone for survival. That might be a part of it. But now we have the opportunity to evolve it. It's just that if our programming is, I need you to validate me to feel valuable myself, that's on top of the biology. And I also think that men give their power away in relationships, but in a different way, when they don't own their feelings and needs and they just get passive and withdraw instead, which is probably what's happening when he's not making you his priority. So we can then start talking about that.
Okay, so why a person doesn't make you a priority is, I think, as we kind of looked at this little history lesson, and we looked at the biology, and we've looked at the childhood wounds and traumas a man might experience that causes negative patterns and limiting beliefs in their life. We have to kind of now say, okay, what do people really want out of a relationship? And I think this is where the challenge happens, particularly for those in midlife. Unlike men in their 20s and 30s, men typically in their 20s and 30s, if they have resigned themselves that they want children and a family, then they particularly look for women who would be their wife, if you will. So they actually have certain criteria they're looking for from a person, whether it's both the physical and the emotional and the nurturing and so forth, is that they're on the hunt for a wife. Now, here's where it gets tricky for midlife. Roughly about 75% of people over 45 years old who are single are divorced. Okay. And remember I said childhood wounds and traumas and adult traumas, divorce actually can be a very traumatic event, because you're unraveling the tapestry of an old life, trying to figure out what you even want in this new life for both men and women alike. And what happens for a lot of people is they kind of feel like they've gotten burned in their previous relationship or marriage. And maybe they've had some relationships that didn't work out that makes them not, they're less reluctant to really fully commit to someone, because the real challenge today we are faced with is most people want companionship, connection, and sex. And what's oftentimes missing is I should say companionship, connection, and coupling, which is sex. And what's missing is the fourth C, is commitment.
Right. And like the
Go ahead.
C in connection is also all of the other aspects of connection, right? Not just sex. But I agree. I mean, I think that that those 4 C's are the main things that we're looking to experience.
Well, but here's the thing. If you've been burned in your
Mhm.
past, that can weigh heavily.
Of
Or
course.
maybe after your divorce, you had a couple relationships that didn't work out, and that can emotionally affect you. And for some men and women, for both men and women alike, it can cause us to not feel good about ourselves, not feel lovable, not feel likable. I know a lot of
Yeah,
men in midlife
exactly.
feel this sense of uncertainty. So imagine
Yeah.
this. See, women will say to me, well, Jonathon, he said he wanted a relationship. Well, yes, he might have wanted companionship, connection, and coupling, but that commitment piece might been missing because there's fear involved. And
Right.
when someone is either on a fear of dating in the fear based, or they're dating with some ambivalence, it's no wonder people aren't your priority
Right.
when you're not really intentional with the process.
Yep. I
And this is
definitely
true for
agree with
women
that.
as well. Because here's the other piece. We've literally been indoctrinated throughout history. Chemistry equals relationship success.
Oh my gosh,
Okay.
I love this topic. We could do a whole interview on this topic,
So,
because then you get, but what? Do I have to date people I'm not attracted to? No,
well,
it's
I'll
just
get
about
into that for a
chemistry is
second.
only one component.
But here's the thing: when you lived in an environment where you shared the same values, you had the same religious affiliation and everything, it was easy because when you had chemistry, you had all the
Right.
other components to make a relationship work already built
Exactly.
in.
Right.
Now we're going to that football stadium I mentioned with
Right.
100,000 people, and we're going, not only do we have to figure out who wants a commitment, but you got to figure out if you're aligned to even be in a commitment. So when we hyper focus on chemistry,
Right.
which most people do, it's no wonder we're having an absolute calamity out there in the dating, mating, or relating realm.
I know. I like to say that if we just follow chemistry, then all that means is that you would either have really healthy babies, or that whatever you feel with this person is eventually going to be whatever love felt like between your parents if you haven't done the inner work.
Yeah.
Because that's what feels familiar. That's what makes you feel like, oh, I've known this person my whole life. Oh my God. That's what that means.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
So,
if you haven't done the inner work. The healing, though, is doing the inner work to get in touch with meeting your own needs and identifying the developmental needs that weren't met, which I'm sure you have your own version of the inner work, so that you're prioritizing what's most deeply meaningful to you, right? Because
yeah,
the outer reflects the inner, as we know.
exactly. So, all right. So everyone listening might think, okay, Jonathon, you said a lot of things. How do we work around this kind of stuff? I think the most important thing is if you are choosing to put yourself out there to be seen in the dating marketplace. Okay. I mean, if you desire a relationship with someone and you put yourself out there, then I think what number one is to be intentional in the process, be very intentional.
Absolutely.
Now,
Yeah,
the clients
I
I
really
work
do
with,
think that that's the most important thing.
yeah. And but some might say, well, what does that mean? Well, I work with women, and they call me up and they say, Jonathon, I already know what I want in a relationship. And they always go, I know what I want, I know what I want, I know what I want. And then what's interesting is they go through my proprietary coaching program that I created, and I have them, what their first essay to me, it gets rewritten. And do you know what they say every single time? I didn't, why didn't they teach me this in school? Why didn't my parents teach me this? Why didn't I learn this before? They
Yep.
actually recognize is what they thought they wanted was based on their ego,
Right.
because it's been up in the 40,000 foot level. And what I do is help concretize it, or
Right.
at least is understanding the mechanics to the healthy, happy relationship. So number one, when you know who's really compatible with you, number two, you can ask better questions. One of the things I talk about in my coaching is what's called radical honesty, pre-qualifying your prospect.
Yep.
And quite frankly, women are afraid to ask men deeper questions because they're afraid the guy's going to run away. And I'm here to say, yeah, the wrong guy always runs away from
Right,
good
right. Which
questions.
is the point of asking them, is you want to make the wrong guy run away. And then it's important to work through our limiting beliefs about rejection there.
But some people will say, well, Jonathan, you're not supposed to interview or, or interrogate someone. I'm like, no, that's exactly what you want to do. That's
Well, in a way that doesn't feel like that, right? That's
exactly
the
in a very
feminine arts of
conversational
it.
way.
Yes,
Yeah.
and in a way that's fun, right? Like it's about what's fun for you to talk about, which is going deeper about your own values, because a value is something that
Well,
you love, that you feel
Well, let me
good
give you
about.
an example of
Yeah.
something. So you might simply say, where did you grow up? Oh, I grew up in Pasadena. What was it like growing up in Pasadena? That's here in California. Oh, it
Yep.
was, it was really tough and blah, blah, blah. And what were your parents like? Well, my mother was a despicable human being. By the way, that's not my case. I'm just saying that tongue in cheek. By the way, there's a picture of my mom and dad right there when
Oh,
they were in
that's
their
really
20s.
sweet.
But well, that begs a question. Your mother was a despicable human being. What do you think that might have caused trauma in a person's life if they had a traumatic experience with their mother and or father? If a woman had an
Exactly.
emotionally unavailable father, how would that play out in their adult life? And we dismiss all those going, oh, we operate from a place of oftentimes going, oh, let me have compassion for them. No, people
Well,
that had screwed up
yes,
childhoods
and but
oftentimes,
yes.
well, I'm saying most people had messed up childhoods who did no inner healing work oftentimes carry those forward in future relationships,
Of course.
either the way they pick people or how they dismiss people.
Yeah, I mean, like that, in my opinion, should be our inside voice when we hear that. Like, ding, 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 ding. What have they done to heal that? Because if they had a despicable parent, that means that they have an inner critic that has that voice, and they also get that way when they're angry if they haven't done the inner work, right? And so I think two things happen for women though when they're in that situation. They either ignore it because they don't know what to do with it, or they have compassion, right? Because, well, I think compassion is a yes and I can have compassion, but how should I get closer to this person or not? Is that healthy or not for me? But I think the other issue that women get into in this case is that they don't know what to say, because they don't want to say that out loud, like, oh, you had a despicable parent. Well, how do you think that gave you trauma? Like, that's not what you say, right?
You
And
could
so
say
they don't know
something
what
like,
to
well,
say
no, but what you
instead.
could say is, wow, that must have been really hard on you. How did you heal from that? I mean,
Exactly.
it's a very
Exactly.
compassionate way of saying, simply say, and someone who says, what does healing mean? Well, right
Right.
off the bat,
And then it's ding,
you've
ding,
got
ding, ding,
some
ding.
clue. Exactly. So
Then you
the
know they
point,
haven't done the inner work, basically.
exactly. So by asking better questions, because these days dating, it's like this. How's your day going? Did you have a good day? I hope you had a good day. That's the extent of most people's conversations, and they're not digging deeper. And that's just one area to dig deeper in.
Yep.
How they, their lifestyle might be another area that dig deep in. Their relationship with maybe their children and such like that. Their relationship with friends. And again, it's not an interrogation; it's a conversation, because
Right.
ultimately, if you give your heart to a person who has weak emotional maturity or weak relationship skills, you know, and well, most likely, I'm going to say people that choose those people tend to have those weak skills as well. And I'm not saying that as an absolute, but there might be some mirroring going on there that requires one to look. In other words, when you find yourself deeply attracted to a person who has weak emotional maturity or relationship skills, oftentimes is a reflection of what's going on within oneself.
Yeah, and it might be complementary skills that are needed, right? Like if you're attracted to somebody who is selfish, for example, and you can't help being attracted to men who are selfish, you might have a belief that you need to make the other person happy for you to feel valuable yourself, right? And then the healing is more to learn how to prioritize yourself, etc. Right.
So I talked about being intentional. I talked about radical honesty. Ultimately, if we want to really get to being a person's priority, I'll share with you those three things that which is in the title. And that's first and foremost is know your worth.
Right.
Know your worth, find that space within yourself that I don't need you to love me so I can feel good about myself. Therefore, you don't operate in the dating process of getting attached to someone until you've actually built the deep roots of trust in a relationship. That's number
Right.
one.
Exactly.
Number two is by setting healthy boundaries within this process. And sometimes it's the boundary within yourself is, at least here in the United States, we are lacking hugely on self-discipline, and part of that is because we're unaware that we need to have self-discipline, but part of the boundary is either of setting a boundary for someone else or setting the boundary for ourselves. Because when you have healthy boundaries and standards in your life, you actually become more attractive to a person who also has good standards and boundaries.
Yep.
Okay. We actually appreciate people that aren't doormats, and we certainly don't appreciate people that act entitled. And the third thing is going to
exactly.
go ahead.
And it's a skill, boundaries
Yeah.
are a skill. If people tell me, oh, I have bad boundaries, it's like, I think what's important to understand is that all of these are learnable skills.
Yeah. The one thing that I think really attracts a person and wants to, I could have come up with 10 things. Okay. I just can't. Today, we're reviewing 3 simple things, but ultimately, and I think this is most important that people are missing these days in the dating process, because oftentimes we're so much in our head doing the evaluation and asking questions, is that they forget to be in their little kid. And what I mean to say is, to be fun, to be playful, to be chill.
Exactly.
I'm in a very, what I'd like to think is a healthy, happy relationship right now. And what I think we both appreciate most within this relationship is our little kids play together all the time, because we did the evaluating piece. We did, first off, we did 3 days where we unpacked our lives, and we just put our cards on the table and we go, okay, we're a fit. And then our little kids started to play together.
I think that's great, because that's the only way. It's like, first you have to see if you're aligned on a deeper level, like you're talking about. And you do need to have good sense of self-worth to ask those deeper questions, because it does take courage, because the person could run away if they're the wrong person. Right. So, I think that once you do that preliminary work, then that sets the stage for you to relax into it and have fun and be playful.
Exactly. Most relationships these days hyper focus on the chemistry and the physical. So they neglect doing your really good, fact finding, being Columbo. For those of us that are baby boomers and Gen Xers, remember Columbo, being a good detective. Which is a little bit of
a masculine archetype. I don't know what the feminine corollary would be, but anyway.
Well, can I comment on that? Because
sure.
I want to address
that. No problem.
Because just because it was a man doing it doesn't make it masculine or feminine. And what I mean to say is asking good questions to determine if you're a fit for one another is neither masculine nor feminine.
That's true. I wasn't sure about the archetype. I agree that the skill of asking
then Nancy Drew would have been in the mix too.
There you go. Right. Okay, I'm just trying to, find someone that women can. I do think archetype work is important. Like if I don't have confidence, then I can imagine, okay, if I was Nancy Drew, then what questions would I ask? It helps to spark our creativity.
And by the way, there's probably older detectives out there in the television world. I just can't think of one right now. Maybe Wonder Woman, if you will.
That's, it's just archetype work can be fun and playful.
So coming back to, we oftentimes hyper focus on chemistry, which we've discussed that probably doesn't make good sense. We recognize that human beings evolved biologically, and instinctually and over time. And certainly we have to look at socialization that plays a part in the dynamics of human pair bonding between men and women. And then we look at the imprinting that happens, that childhood wounds and traumas and such. And then we go a little step further and we look at their adult experiences and how that could play a role in there. Certainly cultural differences can play a role in there.
Absolutely.
our physical health and well-being can play a role in this. I talked about cultural and religious experiences, but ultimately, and the reason why I'm bringing this up, and I have my notes that I'm looking at while I'm talking about this, is that
Yeah.
shifting to that place of where you can be your little kid, I think comes with the awareness and the work that one has done, where you've been introspective, where you've done work on oneself. It actually frees you up to be who you are in your essence. We all came here as unconditional love to some degree. And when we can shed the armor, we can shed the residue of all these things I just talked about, and actually find our space to be our little kid, not a little kid that can be taken advantage of. I'm talking that playful side in you.
Yeah, your pure essence of joy and play and creativity and fun, and
Because
just like enjoying the flow of the back and forth and the dance together.
yeah, and what I think I see missing in most relationships today is a true building of friendship with one another.
Yes.
Truly build. That's what I meant by play. It's not, play can also be in that, when you, I want you to think about this. The ideal partner is someone where not only can you can share your deepest thoughts and secrets with, but you also just enjoy hanging out with and playing with.
Yes.
And I think oftentimes people are coupling today, so holding on to avoiding really getting deeper intimacy with one another, because we weren't trained at actually developing deeper intimacy. But we do this with our friends all day long. For most part, most humans, if they have a really good friend in their life or several, you're rather intimate with them. And I'm not talking about physical intimacy. I'm talking about emotional intimacy.
Exactly.
Anyways, I went off on lots of tangents there.
Yeah, but I really like what you're saying, because it seems like an inner and an outer framework, meaning that the image I'm getting is almost like, because we're talking about our inner child playing, like a playground with a fence around it, right? Because you want to create a fence around a playground so that little kids can feel the freedom to play and not feel I think I forget what study I've heard of, that kids will actually go all the way out to the fence, but if there's no fence, they stay closer to the playground because they're not sure where the boundary is. They're not sure where the safety ends, right?
Well, that's kind of interesting, and that makes sense. Yeah.
And it's the same thing when we don't go deep enough with someone. We don't know if it's safe to really be vulnerable because we've sensed red flags, but we haven't checked them, right? We haven't had those deep conversations. So all of the work that you talked about with steps 1 and 2 of owning your worth and then going deeper and asking those deeper questions to create that deeper sense of compatibility, that's like building the fence, so that in, the third component of how to make it get someone to make you their priority, because people prioritize what is important to them, and that's the fence, is finding out what's important to them inside that fence.
I like the way you put a bow on. I want to say I like the way you put a bow on that, and certainly I really appreciate the analogy of the playground and such like that. Ultimately,
you can take it or leave it, but that's kind of
no,
what
I
I'm
loved
sensing.
it, and I will say that ultimately, when we think of real, genuine commitment with another person, when you've listen, these days, monogamy and exclusivity are barely discussed in the dating process. And I think it's one of the most important things to evaluate. But more importantly, is an agreement. Are we exploring a fully committed relationship or not?
Totally.
Because commitment to me is about trust. And trust isn't just about fidelity. Trust is, does this person care about my feelings as much as I care about my own feelings? That's real trust. When you know this person genuinely has your best interest at hand.
Absolutely.
Even if there's a conflict, they're always looking out for your best interest. And what I see sadly today is such weak levels of trust, weak levels of commitment, and they're just experiencing the surface level of a relationship and not the deeper level that comes through real emotional intimacy. And
Yeah,
so
that's really well
I'm a
said.
big,
And I think it's
yeah.
just about a skill set of how to go deeper. And of course, then that's where the wounds are. But healing is also a skill set, in my opinion.
Well, one of the things my partner and I do is once a month we do what's called camping, and we actually set a nest out in the living room, and we just connect for 6 to 10 hours, really exploring the nooks and crannies of our relationship. And we do it in that environment
Yeah,
because
so good.
the idea of nesting is that safe space, the fencing, if you will. But that
Yes.
fencing is also, look, we have an agreement.
Mhm.
If we're withholding something, let's bring it to the surface and
Right.
talk about it. Because what typically, when you see relationships that end up failing, it's because they've shoved so many things under the rug, it's
Mhm.
almost too late.
Right,
And so,
exactly.
and by the way, I mean, sometimes it's just a little innocuous thing, it's like, God, I don't want to share it because it's private to her, but sometimes
But
by,
they
again,
build up, whatever the
yeah.
little thing is, it builds up because it's not really about the thing, it's about the emotional need underneath.
However, excuse me, not however, and by the way, I'm doing my best to eliminate but from my languaging by saying and.
Me
Um,
too.
we have an agreement that we're exploring a long-term relationship with each other. We have this agreement,
Right.
and it's to some, and I want to emphasize this because a lot of people are in relationships without that intentionality we talked about. They're just
Hmm.
in the exploring stage, and we made it very early on, literally within the first few weeks that we're exploring the relationship. We said, we believe that there's something real here. We are committed to exploring it. Now, if it doesn't work out, that's okay too. I think it's really important to have those agreements with one another,
Hmm.
because you won't make someone a priority if they're not a priority to you. And I know that's, it's like backward talking, but
Yes,
it's
yes.
by saying that the relationship is a priority, not you, but the relationship is a priority. Commitment is a
Yeah.
priority.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're saying is that you can't expect somebody to value a long-term relationship or something else that you want them to value until they've said they do. Right? It's
Exactly. That's
them
exactly it.
saying they do that makes you then say, oh, like, because I think what happens is a lot of people expect, oh, we're really connected, so he should want what I want without asking the deeper questions. Or we could be coming from a limiting belief that no man wants commitment anyway, and that's also something to be worked through, right? But
Well,
it's
that's going to sabotage everything if you have that
right,
mindset and belief. But more importantly, because there are a lot of men who don't want commitment, I'm here to say
right.
is, because here's the thing, and I'll kind of wrap up on this note. Not that it's the
Mhm.
most positive, but I think it has value in it.
We'll find the positive. We're coaches.
I know you're great at that. So in the dating process, you're sitting down, you're talking to one another, you're getting to know each other, and someone says, "I want a relationship," and the other person says, "I want a relationship too." So you think, "Wow, we're on the same page." The only way you're going to be on the same page is you understand the context of what that word means to you. So in
Yep.
my context, the word of being in a relationship means something like this. We spend 3 or 4 days and nights together weekly, doing shared activities, hobbies, mutual interests, spending time with family and friends, traveling together, teamwork, building skills, both in our personal and our professional life, intimacy, both physical and emotional intimacy that leads to either moving in together or getting married. That's what a relationship means to me. And the other person says, "Oh, I'll just see you at my beck and call."
Yep.
Well,
That's exactly the
two different
discrepancy that a
contexts.
lot of people are used to seeing, huh?
Yeah. So the word relationship may not mean the same thing. So I invite everyone to begin to explore what a relationship means to you first, and then get the context of what it means to someone else. And I will leave on this note as well.
Yeah, that it's
Ask
a great, great note.
and ask a man. And by the way, since I coach women, I'm going to assume the majority listening are women, but if there are men listening to this, is great. I invite everybody to ask, what does commitment look like for you, and what does it mean to you?
Yep.
What does commitment look like for you? And what does commitment mean to you? Because
Yep.
people are using the word relationship, and I'd like to invite them to use the word commitment. Because if you're going to have regular sex together, I think it should be under the guise of some level of agreement or commitment with one another.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's what most people want. At least most people as they reach a certain age that they define as maturity. Because
Age
people
has
have
nothing to do with maturity, by the way.
that, right, exactly. And we go through phases, and that's not always what we want in different phases of our lives. However, I think that it's really important. And what you're saying, I do think is a really good note to end on. Because there are just as many definitions of relationship and commitment as there are people in the world.
Yeah.
And the first way to know whether someone else wants what you want is to go really deep about what you want. And that can be a fun process. I wrote a book about that process, by the way. It's called The Commitment Roadmap. And I know that you also have a free gift that you're offering.
Well, I have a free gift called the 5 Qualities a Man Looks For in a Soulmate. I'm sure there's a link somewhere below here.
Yes, of course. I will be putting a link.
And it takes you to my website and allows you to see some of the other content I have. I have a very popular YouTube channel that I shoot videos almost daily for the channel. So I on a variety of different topics, similar to the one we just talked about here. And my hope is the takeaway from this is, let's skip the fantasy of what we think relationships are about and really understand the mechanics of a healthy, happy relationship. And when you study it and you do the inner work and you operate from an intentional place, you at least have a greater chance of success than those that are just winging it. And a lot of people are just winging it. So.
No, exactly. I mean,
by the way, I have a hard stop in 2 minutes, like 1 minute.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I mean, anyway, as I was going to say, I completely agree, because as they say in the coaching world, everything is created twice, right? You have to know what you want and create that blueprint in your mind for you to attract it in the outer world. And those 5 qualities men look for in a soulmate, I really encourage you to get that free gift, because I'm sure that is a big part of inner clarity about what you truly want. And so thank you so much, Jonathon, for giving women the path to know what they're most aligned with, so that they can attract a quality man who can create that commitment, that safe fence, so to speak, that keeps your heart safe so you can have that love and joy and play and passion, right? Because that's what we all want.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm honored. And thank you for allowing me to share to your group.
Yes, of course. And I hope that you have a love-filled day and that you get to go play with your girlfriend in all the wonderful ways that you described, and that you enjoy that soul-shaking love, as should everybody on the planet who wants it.
Thank you.